Thanks, Leslie. Celinda, always good to be with you and appreciated that incisive summary of the data. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why we're seeing these really extraordinary movements in public opinion and the sentiments of the American people. And my law firm colleague Madison is going to put some links in the chat as we go to things, analysis that I've done along the way. At the outset of the hearings, I wrote for the Times that to measure success for the committee, we would need to look at three dimensions, three boxes, if you would. And Madison, please drop that Times piece into the chat. The cable box, that is the performance of the committee in reaching out to the American people, conveying the truth of what happened in all of its complexity. The ballot box, and you've just seen some of the data indicating how salient the work of the committee, the investigation and the hearings is, and the jury box, the prospect of actual prosecutions of those who are responsible, not just for what happened on January 6th, but the long run-up that that we hoped the committee would elucidate. Normally, we would have a fourth box, the tally box on those long legislative sheets, which I know everyone has seen, where you measure votes on legislation in Congress. Just as after Watergate, we had a complete reworking of the legislative system, but owing to the log jams in Congress, the prospect of that kind of comprehensive democracy reform has been frustrated by an intractable GOP minority in the Senate, principally by them. I am going to come back with a footnote about legislation at the very end. First, then, a word about the cable box, and then I'll move to the heart of the matter, the most likely area for accountability, and that is criminal prosecution. I won't bury the lead. I believe that we have gone from, quote, likely crimes, as a federal judge said Trump was involved in before the hearings, to substantial proof, and perhaps proof beyond a reasonable doubt in two areas. And we, after Cassidy Hutchinson's performance on Tuesday, we now are on the precipice. We're reaching the verge of proof beyond a reasonable doubt in a third area, and the hearings are not over. We're in the halftime break. And that means that I assess a high likelihood of state and or federal prosecution of Trump and others as a result of the movement that we've had. First, a word about the committee's performance. Myself, having been counsel for the for a House committee for the impeachment and trial of Donald Trump, I think it has been extraordinary. I wrote in the Times this morning about both the crimes and the performance. Madison, if you'd be kind enough to put up this morning's link, if it's not in the chat already. It's the Watergate hearings, but for the TikTok era. Volumes will be written about what the committee has done and how they have done it. But the blend of, the oldest form, most ancient form of people sitting by the campfire, these live witnesses, and telling you what happened, with these rapid succession video clips that really capture the shorter attention, but more intense attention span of our era vis-a-vis previous hearings, and the fact that the case is being prosecuted, despite promising not to do a criminal case, they are very much articulating one, by Republican witnesses, almost entirely Trump allies and adherents, his most ferocious defenders, until he went one step too far with this conspiracy to overturn the election. That has been compelling. And of course, the role of Liz Cheney as the prosecutor in chief, the single most recurring voice, even more than the chairman, herself an extremely conservative Republican who also cannot live with, made a break with the former president and his co-conspirators when it came to these crimes. What are these crimes and how has the committee substantiated them? And is there an obstacle, the single biggest obstacle we often purportedly hear about, intent? I begin, and perhaps my biggest, the most frequent thing that I talk about and text about and email about with my friends in the press who've really done a good job of covering everything. But if there's one place where I find myself reminding my friends, we have to not only talk about Merrick Garland, we have to always say state and federal prosecution, because there is a very advanced state prosecution of Trump for the principal issues until Cassidy Hutchinson, the principal issues that have been established in these proceedings. They are the Georgia state crimes. Madison, if you'd be kind enough to put in my big report on the Georgia state crimes into the chat, that we heard about in that stunning day when Brad Raffensperger, Gabriel Sterling, both from Georgia, and Rusty Bowers testified, just fined 11,780 votes. There are a set of state and federal crimes, for example, the Georgia prohibition on soliciting election fraud. There are a set of state and federal crimes that are under advanced investigation on the state side in Georgia, and that are thrown off by that. It is not just a Georgia crime. Madison, if you'll put my NBC Think piece in the chat, please, with Fred Wertheimer. It's also a federal crime to fabricate non-existent votes. That tape is the first. There are 3 smoking guns in this case. The tape is the first. It's not just smoking guns. There's a smoking arsenal of Donald Trump and his co-conspirators' guilt. The first is that tape of the January 2nd call with Brad Raffensperger. That establishes both state and federal crimes. The second is the fraudulent electoral certificates, also under investigation in Georgia. Also, we know because of the flurry of subpoenas, including the raid on Jeff Clark and also the seizure of John Eastman's devices, both of them intimately involved in the phony elector scheme to fabricate, forge, and counterfeit electoral certificates in 7 states. You look at them, they look just like a regular one. They were submitted to the federal government, to the National Archives. They often were people went, these phony electors, to the legally appointed location using subterfuge and concealment to sneak in to government buildings to fabricate these certificates. We know that's under federal investigation. We know that's under investigation in Georgia. And those certificates are the smoking gun. And why does that matter? Madison, if you'll put my Washington Post op-ed in the chat. No matter what you may believe about whether you won or lost an election, you do not have the right to fabricate non-existent votes or to forge electoral certificates. It's like OJ. He believed that he owned the memorabilia, and he did appear to own some of the memorabilia in that hotel room he broke into in Las Vegas, but he went to jail because you can't take the law into your own hands. It's electoral vigilantism. And finally, the third set of crimes are federal crimes. I believe 18 U.S.C. 1512, obstruction of an official proceeding in Congress, 18 U.S.C. 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, the violence that we now know Trump was fully engaged in He knew those protesters were armed. He wanted to take down the mags. He wanted to march with those armed protesters, and he incited them in his speech nonetheless. He said, let's fight. A federal crime is made out by that when you combine it with his spurring them while his own vice president was under assault with his tweet a little after 2 p.m. on January 6th, and then the callous, not just indifference, but agreement with the violence that we heard Cassidy Hutchinson provide testimony about what Trump had said to Mark Meadows and Pat Cipollone. That, by the way, is one of the reasons it's so important that the committee subpoena Pat Cipollone as they've done and bring him in. So state and federal crimes amply proved in 3 dimensions, multiple smoking guns. And I think that after this week, we are quite likely, I assess, to have criminal prosecution of Trump. I think it also gives momentum, my last note, to fixing some of our broken laws, and perhaps we'll see fixes to the Electoral Count Act that governs January 6th with a plus package, so-called ECA plus, that prevents this kind of violence from ever happening again. We need a big plus package to go with any ECA fix.